Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to face the fear and do it anyway, then do we have the Do It Scared show for you. Today I'll be talking with Ruth Soukup, best-selling author, mega blogger extraordinaire, and the author of a brilliant book on leaning into the fear and finding your courage, Do It Scared. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about 7 key principles to find your courage, face your fears, and do it scared. That, plus we'll talk about Groundhog Day at the Soukups. Gotcha. The power of shopping at Target, waffles, workouts, and upcoming birthdays. The mantra, it's not my fault. Baby fit blowouts, Lita the Lab, hiding Doritos, and what in the world dating tragedies and Mr. Sleazy, I'm so sorry, have to do with anything. So welcome back to the show, Ruth. Are you ready to shine?
I am ready to shine. Let's do this. Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
Well, it is so great to have you here. You know, you were really brave in this book because buried in the content of this book is the thick of your story. And
Yes.
if it's all right with you, I'd like to dive into that a little bit for people today.
Good.
So
Yeah,
let's
totally.
go way on back, way before you built an amazing blogging empire. Could you take us back to your earliest days and what was your courage like?
Well, I don't know that my courage really existed back then and what you're referring to. So in my early 20s, I went through a really bad depression.
Let's scroll way back. Let's scroll back
Way back.
to a little kid. We don't have to go to a specific event, but did
Yeah.
you have courage? Did you not have courage? What were you like?
You know, that's an interesting question because I think that in some ways I did and in some ways I didn't. It's funny because you always see, like, now that I'm a mom, I see so much of myself as I was as a little kid in my 2 daughters, and they are as different as night and day. But I see certain parts of my oldest daughter's personality and the things that she likes to do in myself, but
Yeah.
my little one, I see so much of her in me too. And she's a little spitfire. And I think I was a little spitfire too. I think I was kind of like a little hurricane, which I guess I'm still a hurricane. But then there were other parts, and I think this is probably what you're referring to. You know, I had um, I was sexually abused when I was a kid, and I for 4 years there was a babysitter that he was actually the husband of the a woman that used to stay with us when my parents would travel and go out of town, but then he would come and stay with us also when they were out of town. And so he, would come into my room at night for many years. And I was not brave then. In fact, this is the nature of abuse, and abusers are really good at capitalizing this, of threatening and saying, I'll hurt you, you can never tell anybody, and making you feel like it's your fault. And so I harbored that for so many years, that this was something I had done. And then I figured out, like, how to completely just stuff it and repress it and not let it come through. Of course, it comes out in other ways. And for me, it came out when I was in high school. I was severely anorexic, and that happened. And until finally it sort of all came to a head when I was in college, and when after he died and it was finally safe to remember again, that's when it all sort of came out.
Wow, thank you for sharing. And I guess that explains why you were probably not even existential angst, just probably inner pissed off at mofoedness, quit high school and headed for the Netherlands.
I did. Yeah. And that was part of it. I really struggled in high school. I struggled, and now I look back and after doing this work with fear over the last couple of years and the research that we've done, I've realized that my fear archetype is the outcast. And so I was rejecting other people so that to avoid being rejected myself. And I did that all through high school. I was sort of the scary girl in high school, and scary because I was 6'2" and yet weighed 120 pounds because I was so anorexic. And also, was struggling with my mom, who deals with mental illness. And so there was a lot of just hard stuff there. And I just wanted to leave. I just wanted to, my reaction was, I need to get as far away from everyone as I possibly can. And so I became an exchange student and went to Holland.
So, and did you actually finish school there? Because it sounds like you came back without a degree and
I
by miracle of
did.
miracles got into college.
Yes, it's so funny that that's how it happened. But my high school, I grew up in this very small town, very sheltered town, and no one really. It's one of those towns where everybody leaves or everybody stays there forever, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody has always known everybody forever, and nobody leaves. And so when I went to my guidance counselor and said I want to become an exchange student, like, how do I do that? She looked at me and she said, why would you want to leave Linden first? And I can't help you with that. Nobody's ever done that before. And my high school refused to help me. They refused to help me find a program or, acknowledge the credits that I was taking. So normally how it works is you're an exchange student, your existing school helps you kind of do that application. And then you go and you send your transcripts from your school in the other country back, and you still graduate from your normal high school. My school wouldn't do that. And so I just went anyways. And, but the thing is, when you're a senior in college, or a senior in high school, you apply to colleges and you send them your transcripts up till that point. So usually that's your first 3 years. So that's what I did. And they never asked for the last year. So it just sort of worked out.
It's very, very cool. And it really gets me thinking this really, I mean, we're talking about Do It Scared here today. And I'm going back now. I went 1920. I went to Europe, actually to Belgium, just south of Holland, to race bicycles. And that was a pretty gutsy move on my part. But at 17, without, quote, the authority, though at that point you were like, fight the authority. But at that point, without anybody's stamp of approval to go out, that was a pretty brave and bold thing to do.
It's funny because I didn't look at it at the time as a brave and bold thing. I looked at it as survival. I just needed to get away from where I was at right now. I remember going to my dad and saying, you either send me away or I'm running away. Like I cannot do this anymore. I cannot stay in this house anymore. And I kind of wanted to go to boarding school. I was thinking of going to a boarding school, and he was like, well, he was probably the one who suggested it. Why don't you try an exchange program instead? And so I started looking into it, and that was what I did.
Woohoo! You come back, you go to school, you quit school, you get married. I wouldn't say quit marriage, but there was certainly a divorce in there.
Yep.
And then you came off the rails.
Well, not exactly in that order. So
right.
I came back, I went to college,
Yep.
And I went to, this is another area where I didn't feel like I had courage. I came back from Holland and I was so mad. I did not want to leave Holland, and they make you leave. And I didn't. I had the best year of my life there, and I did not want to come back. And when I came back, I did not want to go to college. My dad wanted me to go to the college that he had gone to. Like, that was my choice. I didn't have a choice. I felt like I didn't have a choice. Now I know you always have a choice, but it's how brave are you going to be? And I was not brave. And I remember like fighting with him that summer saying, I don't want to do this. I actually wanted to go to culinary school. And he was like, you're not doing that. You're going to Calvin. That's it. That's final. And showed up at Calvin, and there I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, of all the places I didn't want to be, and trying to figure it out. And then so then my form of rebellion was, when I got there, was to get a full-time job. And I don't know why I did that, really, because wasn't that I needed to do that. My dad was paying for school, because that was the deal. Like, I'm paying for it, so you're going to go where I want you to go. And I just didn't want to be, I guess, beholden to anybody else. So I wanted my own money. I wanted my own job. I wanted to do my own thing. And so I ended up getting a full-time job while I was going to school. So I never really gave myself permission to have that normal college experience of where you just have fun and you meet people in your dorm and you hang out. Like, I was such an outcast at college too, of just rejecting everybody before I could have any part in any of it. But I did, while I was working, I did meet a guy who was, he was working at the same place. We were working at Abercrombie and Fitch, of all places. And he was a senior at Calvin, and he was cute and he was tall and he was really athletic, and he was like everything. I felt like he represented everything that I felt I didn't fit into my family. So the rest of my family is all super athletic and into sports and, just very like he seemed to fit that. And so I was like attracted to that right away because I felt like, oh my gosh, this is the guy that's going to like get me acceptance into my family, and my older siblings I'll finally feel like I belong and I'm part of this family because I have a husband who like fits with them, or I have a man in my life that fits with them. And so we ended up getting married summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. So really early. And of course I had married him for all the wrong reasons. And then my senior year is when it all sort of fell apart. And it was almost like the perfect storm of, had put so much pressure on myself with working full time and trying to get good grades, and then being married and unhappily married. And then on top of that, having all of the memories of abuse that started coming in, and I was taking philosophy and theology classes also at the same time. And I felt like that was a really bad combination when you're depressed.
Oh my God.
All of a
Give me
sudden,
some Nietzsche.
God didn't exist. Yes, exactly. God didn't exist. Life had no meaning. And so there was no purpose.
If this wasn't your higher self putting you on a path, we got to take her down to bring her back.
Yes, that was exactly where I went. And then so my response to that, like I was in so much pain at that point, but I didn't really want to acknowledge like the emotional side of it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how to deal, because I was having all these nightmares and flashbacks and not sleeping and not eating. And that was sort of how I was dealing with it. So it was just my response was, I'm going to kill myself. Life has no meaning. I'm going to kill myself. And I started just like making plans to do that. And that obviously that didn't work. And there was then that started this downward spiral of depression and multiple suicide attempts and self-harm that lasted a good 2.5 years.
So I guess the good news is you said, and you were hospitalized for quite a while, about 2 years from what I understand. When you're in the hospital, you can throw chairs, you can walk around in your bathrobe, you can scream, "Who are you calling crazy?"
You can't really. It's weird. I mean, I remember before, because it wasn't like nobody noticed that I was spiraling downward. I actually had I didn't have any real friends in college, but there was a couple of professors that I was really close to, and they saw like how bad off I was. At that point, my husband and I were living basically separate lives. He was out of school by then, and he was a teacher, and we didn't even talk. It was just like our completely separate lives. And yet I had these professors who were very concerned about me and trying to convince me to get help. And they were concerned. It was obvious that I was not doing well. And I remember them saying, I think you should get help. I think you should maybe consider going to the hospital. We're afraid you're suicidal, or if you're going to do something, hurt yourself. And I remember thinking, there's no way. That's for crazy people. I am not crazy. This is just a philosophical belief. This is a rational decision that I'm making. And you can't really imagine what it is like to give up, because most of the time as humans, we live in sort of this, we stay within the lines, right? We stay within the lines of acceptable behavior, and we don't venture too far out. We might be a little rebellious here and there, but we don't go way off the deep end. And I remember when that happened, and then having my first suicide attempt fail and being involuntarily committed, I remember this feeling of going, I've crossed to the other side. This is the point of no return. I am no longer living in the world of insane people. I am insane, and it is insane. There are people literally throwing chairs and screaming and doing things, walking around in bathrobes, that are things that are not you just wouldn't do in normal life. And it was somewhat it was terrifying, but also somewhat freeing of this, in the sense that you realize like, oh, maybe I don't have to like stay in the lines. Maybe there's something else can be different. And I don't think I necessarily realized that until much later.
So all goes into the soup. You get out, and thank you so much for sharing. You get out, there's still, if I understand, cutting, chain smoking, eyebrow piercings, tattoos, bar
All of the
fights.
above. Bar fights. Oh my gosh. Yes, I bought a tent on a bad check. I wrote, like, I had a checkbook that had
Hmm.
with an account that had no money on it. So I took my checkbook to Sears, bought myself a tent, camped all down the West Coast in the winter, and ended up in Arizona living living with two lesbians that I met with in like a restaurant. The one gal was like the server, and she's like, "What are you doing here in this little town of Ajo, Arizona?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Nothing really." She's like, "Oh, you want to come live with me and my girlfriend?" I'm like, "Okay." I mean, and they were crazy, getting into fights, and one of them was having an affair with another girl in town. It was very crazy and dramatic. And I remember just doing like whatever I could not to feel, I was doing those things. I was doing just the craziest, most self-destructive behavior I could think of. And all of it was this attempt to not actually feel the feelings that were coming
Yeah.
inside. And the same thing with cutting and burning and piercing myself and tattoos and all of that.
So how did you start? You say at 23 you were sure you had ruined your life forever, and when people come to me in coaching and stuff, then they're saying, I can't. I've ruined my life. It's too late for me. Whatever age, I'm like, you're just a spring chicken. There's so much you can do, but you didn't believe that at that time. How did it change, or was it dad, bribery, and a treadmill that started to bring you out?
Yeah, it really was. It was, you know, it's hard to describe the feeling because 2.5 years. So I was not in the hospital straight that time. I'd be in for several months, and then they let you out eventually. And that's when I would do all the self harm and self destructive behavior. And then I would get put back in the hospital, and then same thing. And it was like this cycle that happened for 2.5 years. And every time they were trying all sorts of medication. And I went to like some of the best hospitals in the country. I was at McLean Hospital in Boston for 6 months, which is world renowned as one of the top hospitals in the world for depression and PTSD, which was what that was my diagnosis, major depression and PTSD. And they tried all sorts of different things. And while I was there, they actually then decided that I was what they called treatment resistant. And so then they decided to try electroshock therapy, which most people don't realize that they even do electroshock therapy anymore, which they do. And it's horrific. And it's as horrific as it sounds.
That sounds like one flew
And
over the cuckoo's nest.
totally, that's what it was. And I mean, I literally, like, there were times where I was in a straitjacket, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. And that was especially when they tried. I was um, at McLean for 6 months, and then they transferred me to Harborview in Seattle, and they do a more aggressive form of electroshock therapy and at Harborview, and that was where I did not respond well to it, and that was where I was actually like restrained in 5-point restraints. And I mean, so like when I talk about it now, and I can't, it's hard for me to just even realize how that was my life, because at that point, so I was at Harborview for 6 weeks, I think. And then they finally said, there's nothing more we can do for you. Like, we have exhausted all of our treatment options. We don't know how to help you. And that's when they sent me home to die. And when basically like the people at the psychiatric hospital are telling you there's no hope, that's when you really think there's no hope for me. There is nothing left for me. And at that point, I looked like hell. I had shaved off all my hair. Had piercings and cuts everywhere on my all over my body. And I had been divorced. I had dropped out of school at that point. My whole family had given up on me. All my friends had given up on me. You can only put up with that kind of stuff for so long. And I didn't know what else to do. And so I went to my dad's house because nobody else would take me at that point. And I don't think he really even wanted me, but he couldn't turn me away either.
Yeah.
And I just laid in bed for several months. I just laid there. And then finally he couldn't take it anymore. And he did bribe me. This was 20 years ago. So cell phones were a really big deal.
Yeah.
And he bribed me with a cell phone so that I could talk to the few friends I had left who were all in different cities because they were all psychiatric patients. And he said, if you just go and walk on the treadmill 3 times a week, then I'll get you a cell phone and I'll pay for a cell phone. And so that's what I did. And then I'd go straight back to bed. But it gave me just enough of something. I don't know what it was, whether it was endorphins or just the like literal process of taking one step and putting one foot in front of the other, gave me just enough motivation to then I called a therapist, a new therapist, and I said, I've just spent 2.5 years talking about every bad thing that's ever happened to me. It hasn't helped. I don't want to do this anymore. I just need to know how to live because I don't even know how to do that. And that was what she would do. From then on, she helped me, first it was like going to the grocery store without having a panic attack. And then just eating better and getting a part-time job and then moving out of my dad's house and getting my own apartment and getting a full-time job and then going back to school. And I got a dog who was so hyper that she
This is perfect.
Forced me to get out of the house. She was a chocolate lab and she was the most hyper dog on the planet, but I had to take her out for walks a couple times a day. And that, then I started meeting other dog owners at the park and I started making friends who were not crazy and all of those things. Every single step, it was all little things. There was never one big thing that was like, oh, this was the turning point, and then my life turned magically perfect. It was just one little step and the next little step and the next little step after that got me there. And every step along the way, it was do it scared was my mantra. Just do this and do this next step. Do it scared. Feel the fear. Do it scared. Do it scared. Do it scared. And it's funny because that was many years ago now. But then in 2010, I started my business, and I have felt every step along the way with my business, it's been the same thing. There's always things that terrify me. Every day I'm doing things that I don't know how to do or that I've never done before. And I'm still using that mantra, just do it scared, take one step and then the next step and then the next step after that.
So we're going to talk all about that. We're going to dive from here into the 7 principles of courage. But before I do that, I'm very curious, since we have a very spiritual audience, I know you're Christian, when did faith come into play? Or was there a point at which one of my mantras is, I give it to you, God. I give it to you, God. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I give it to you.
Yeah. That's a great question too. So I grew up in a Christian household, and Calvin was, as you can probably guess from the name, was a Calvinist Christian college, and that was what I grew up. I grew up in a denomination called Christian Reformed. It's based in Calvinism, and so faith was a huge part of my life growing up. I mean, Christian schools all my life, church twice every Sunday, not just once, twice every Sunday, and youth group on Wednesdays, like the whole 9 yards. It was the central part of my entire life. But what happened is, like I said, I was taking theology and philosophy at the same time. At the same time, I was having all these memories and flashbacks to the abuse that had happened as I was a kid with people that said that they believed the same thing that I did. And it was like I had this visceral reaction of rejection of religion, that rejection of God, saying a God that loves, is supposed to be love, would not have let this stuff happen to me. And I can't reconcile this belief. But then the problem with having had God be the central thing in my life for my entire life, the absence of God was so terrifying that was where the suicidal thoughts came from, of like, well, if there's no God, then what's the point? And so that was where I but again, like a lot of that rationalization that was happening was also a protection mechanism for me to not feel the feelings that I was having and to not deal with the feelings. If I could go to this philosophical place, and I read every philosophy book out there. I mean, my hospital room was just like stacks of of philosophy books and every philosopher, and which the knowledge has come in handy exactly one time in the last 20 years. My husband and I like to do bar trivia sometimes. And one time
Yep.
there was philosophy was a category and I nailed that category. We won that round. So we were really excited, but, but yeah, so all of that happened. So then, fast forward a couple of years, I got this new therapist. I started putting back the pieces of my life very, very slowly, one step at a time. But God was not a part of that picture. I mean, and I say that God was not a part for me, but God was still there watching it happen and being a part of it. And I firmly believe like everything happens the way that it's supposed to. And it wasn't actually until much later until I met my husband, and it was sort of like God and I came to this agreement, like we're just gonna be, like it was a breakup where we're just gonna be friends. Yep. Like you do your thing, I'll do me, and we can just agree to disagree with wherever we're at. And so I wasn't angry anymore, but I also was not interested in having a relationship. And I got married and remarried to the man who's still my husband. And we had our first daughter. Mm-hmm. And my husband is 20 years older than me. And his mom had kind of given up on the fact that he was ever going to get married and that she was ever going to have grandchildren, because by the time we met, he was 45 years old, had never been married, had never, like it didn't even feel like it was a reality. She was 80 years old when we first started dating. And all of a sudden when we had our first daughter, he was 47. It like opened up this whole new world. And what her dream had always been was that her grandchild would be baptized in a dress that was made from her wedding dress. Like she had always talked about that. And then she had given up on that dream because she thought she was never going to have grandchildren. And all of a sudden, well, that posed a little bit of a problem for us, because in order to have your child baptized, you have to actually be like a member of a church. Mm-hmm. And so we started going to church pretty much just so that we could have our child baptized. And not really because, and my husband was like less contentious towards the church. Like he, I would think would consider himself a Christian, but he was definitely not like a active member of the church or anything like that. And so faith was never really a part of our relationship. It was not based in that. It was not based in any sort of shared religion or anything like that. And so it was a little weird then for us to get to this point where we're like, well, now I guess we have to go to church. So we joined a church, and that was like not my proudest moment, because when you join a church, you have to stand up there and say, I believe this stuff and I'm ready. And we really kind of didn't at that point. We were just joining to get our child baptized, but God uses that too. I mean, like every one of your mistakes can be used for good. And what happened is we felt guilty for doing that. And so we kept going. Yeah. And then we kept getting invited to things, and people kept welcoming us in. And we were both so resistant to it. And, we were like, well, I guess we can go to church on Sunday, but we're definitely not Bible study people. And just the love of the people in that church really like started to soften our hearts, and God started working on both of us really independently. And, after it took a few years, but we kind of both came around, and then we had to figure out how to talk about it with each other. And it was funny because by that point I had actually started my blog, and I think I wrote about it. And I remember Chuck going, were you going to tell me that you found God again? That's so cool. And I was like, well, I wasn't really sure how to tell you. He's like, well, that's kind of cool, because I feel like I have too. So it was just a funny, like a weird kind of dynamic to navigate, but it's been so good for both of us. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel, where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!